Okay, yesterday we left off with talking about different types of structures that you'd find in mollusks. And just like every other phylum that we've talked about, there's going to be certain characteristics that these animals have in common. With that of the sponges, remember those have lots of pores. That's why they're in the phylum Porifera. Okay, they are filter feeders and they've got an osculum of some sort. Then we moved on to that of the cnidarians, which have radial symmetry. Okay, that was one characteristic. They all produce venom, and that venom comes from structures called tentacles that have these nematocysts and cells of cnidocytes that produce that venom. All those are characteristics that the cnidarians have. The same thing's going to happen when we're talking about these mollusks. They're going to have characteristics in common. They all have a radula, and that is needed for food gathering because these animals don't have a jaw, neither do they have teeth. Now, that's a little bit slightly different when we start talking about the squids and the octopods. They do have what would resemble maybe a beak that you could find on Jerry, the owl above the door when you walk in. That type of beak is also used for bringing in a type of flesh-eating diet, so there would be that of a carnivore. But this structure, again, it's got teeth on it, and that's how they actually consume their prey item, is because using that radula moved by the odontophore that actually does their food gathering for them. Okay? So all mollusks have a shell of some sort, and they also have a radula. Okay? Now in these clams, what you would see, it was called a head and foot, and anytime you would see a foot, you would associate that with a locomotion. This is no different. Okay? And what these animals do is it just allows them to creep across the bottom of the, river or lake or sea bottom, wherever you'd find that of a clam or a mussel or mussel, however you pronounce that. Okay. And as we look at these, there are three layers, especially to that of the clam. And I can't remember when we cut these open, probably next week, if you can distinguish between these three layers. I'm thinking not. You'd have to be really careful in order to do that. And we just really don't have the tools to break open those different layers of their shell. So I really don't know how it is that you want to actually associate these with their different layers. You really can't go alphabetically because there's a narcerous layer, which is, I believe, is the most inside layer of their shell. And you can see the peristracum, okay, on the very outside. And usually when we refer to these organic substances, whether it's chitin in the arthropods or this conchyolin that you'd find here, it's going to be a non-living material, just like many of the proteins, like collagen and keratin. Those are also organic substances. They really don't reproduce. They continue to grow, but with this, it's not something that would divide or anything to that nature. Okay. So this internal structure and function, notice that we've had on the lesson plans here, we keep talking about form and function. And the reason that's so important is this is going to be another hallmark of evolution. The first hallmark that we had talked about was multicellularity, and oddly enough, that was found in the sponges. It's where we actually have different types of multicellular organisms that's dividing the workload amongst itself. Then the next hallmark would be that of within the cnidarians, we have animals that are actually starting to move. And in this case, this is going to be another hallmark in evolution, because we're going to start talking about different types of body systems that you'd find inside animals, whether it deals with circulation or digestion, and in this case, respiration. So of course, anytime you'd see the term gills, it's going to be some sort of aquatic animal. And then again, this is no exception, because what we would see here is as the water is flowing over the gills, that oxygen then gets absorbed by diffusion. Okay? Even though it's in the water where you think it's osmosis, it's not the water that's moving, it's the oxygen. And this is one of the few instances where you'd see a respiratory system also working as a food gathering system as well. That's another reason this makes this a hallmark of evolution as well. Two different body systems having a separate, or working together and working for respiration and food gathering. Okay? What we mean by that here is, of course, as you can see, anytime you see circulatory system, you're going to have that of a heart, okay, and blood vessels and blood sinuses, because if it's a closed system, then the sinuses get, well, what do I want to say, replaced by capillaries would be a better way of looking at that. So when we say blood vessels, yes, that's still arteries and veins, and you'd have venules and arterioles, but you're just missing the capillaries that would join the arterioles and venules. And just like any other time you see a sinus, the best way to look at that, you have sinuses behind your eyes, behind your nose. When someone says they have a sinus headache, that's just an open cavity of air that's inside your skull. And typically what happens, I think it's a change in the barometric or atmospheric pressure. And what happens is as it goes up or down, it changes the volume of the air inside those sinuses. It can possibly cause a headache. So with this means this heart continues to pump. Okay? It's pushing it through the blood vessels, and then it pools in the sinuses. It doesn't connect the arteries and the veins together. So once it pools in there, it just stays in that area until it contracts that muscle. And once it contracts, it then pushes this blood back into the circulatory system. And that's very evident of that of the foot that we were just talking about. Now, it would be my guess that for those of you who have had oysters or smoked oysters, you may change your tune of enjoying those after we've cut them open. Maybe yes, maybe no. Some of you have possibly had oyster stew. How about out here? You ever had oyster stew before? No? 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 Okay. If you cut these open, would it change your mind, you think, of oyster stew?
Probably not.
Okay. Isn't it sometimes gritty?
Slimy.
That's another good term, slimy. Yeah. It helps it move down the pharynx, and yeah, so it can be digested. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So now you're going to have this pumping heart that's going to start pumping the nutrients around, because you've got a different type of system that's actually doing the digestion. Okay? Now, anytime you have types of digestion taking place, you're also going to have waste products that build up as well, whether it's from digestion or from the blood, pumping blood as well. So what we see here, these kidneys then also have a dual function. Okay? Not only are they going to store the eggs and the sperm for reproduction, but any type of kidney, you refer to that, it's kind of like a filter, or you could say an oil filter for that of your bloodstream. Because that's what kidneys typically do, is they will clean the blood for you as it's passing through the system, or a system. All right. And I think I wanted to get through one. No, I didn't want to get to the gastropods for sure. But we did briefly introduce the nervous system last chapter, which you would have to. The only way that animals can move is if they have muscles, and the only way the muscles can contract is if there's a supporting nervous system that would actually do that of the contracting. Now, when we look at this, it's really not that of a complex brain until we get to the cephalopods. And we certainly know that some animals in the class Cephalopoda are very highly intelligent. Okay? I'll let that sink in, let you see if you can remember the examples that we gave of the animals in the class Cephalopoda yesterday. I'm just willing to bet the terms that you hear, God, I wish we were taking zoology. With what we're talking about, you're saying, God, I wish we were taking zoology. Oh, fair enough. All right. So again, this is really not a complex brain. When we're talking about ganglia, it's just like a set of, like a ball of nervous tissue. And what that does is it starts to send out signals for those muscles to contract. Again, we really don't see a type of complex brain until you get to that of the cephalopods. But that will be for another day and time. That's all I've got for today. Tomorrow we'll go ahead and start talking about that of the gastropods. Okay? And one of the reasons that they get their name for that is because they actually have gas chambers inside of there. Otherwise, that shell on slugs and snails would be much too heavy for them to carry around. So that's why they're called gastropods, because inside those shells there's lots of air chambers. Okay, like I said, that's all I've got for today. We'll catch up to you next time.